Diwu, you're out there? Where are you? Where'd you go? Oh, there he is, over there. We're going to bring him up. And Diwu is going to present to us on value-driven architecture. I'm looking forward to this.
Awesome.
It's all yours, sir.
Appreciate it. All right, I think we have the audience. It's great to be back in physical conference. I'll quickly introduce myself. My name is Steve. I'm Director of Engineering at Coastal Community Bank. Today we're going to talk a little bit about value-driven architecture. So before we dive into the topic, I wanted to see if you can raise your hand if your organization feels IT isn't a cost center. Really? We got one. That's awesome. So most organizations I've worked at or interacted with sees their IT function in general as an order-taking cost center. It's not great. So quickly about myself, I've kind of gone around in different roles in the IT organizations through past experiences. Started with technology deployments and then solution architecture, enterprise architecture, management consulting, tech strategy, and now into engineering. When I work with different organizations, what I often find are two themes when I talk to business leadership about their IT function or architecture in general, where I go ask them, hey, when you get a new piece of software, when do you involve in IT? And the answer often than not is, hey, we'll buy the software and we'll involve IT afterwards. Someone with architecture title can figure out how to integrate it to the rest of the systems. Or my personal favorite answer when I ask them, hey, which architecture team have you talked to? And the answer goes, who? That's generally the sign that your organization, from a business team standpoint, isn't seeing the value from your architecture function or IT in general. And they're seeing you as a cost center, order taking, just to deal with things when they've made a decision. So I've kind of gone through my experience with different organizations, different types of ways or approach to stand up an architecture function in the organization. And virtually every organization I worked with or interact with aren't satisfied with their architecture function in general. And these are two examples that I kind of pulled out from past experience. On one side, you have a leader comes in, hey, I'm going to stand up architecture function in the organization. We're going to start implementing TOGAF framework. We're going to put in the processes, policies, making sure we have the capabilities all mapped out and we can scale the architecture capabilities and functions as the organization grows. In the meantime, we're going to kind of put a pause on taking in business demands because we need to figure this thing out. It's been a bit of a Wild West. I'm coming in. I'm going to steer the ship in a different direction, right? We're going to stand out properly. And then on the right, we have a different type of approach where we're going to identify the quick wins where we can make tangible impact to the business operations. We're going to put in the minimal required processes and procedures in place so that we can actually ensure the delivery of our solutions and outcomes are meeting the standards. However, we're not shooting for the target state day one. We're going to mature these processes and procedures along the way as we deliver the solutions. Now, 6 months later, if you go talk to the CFO, who do you think gets more votes in terms of impact to the organization? The one on the show of hands if you feel the one on the left will get more votes when you talk to the business leadership in terms of how architecture has made an impact to their operations. None? All right. When I talk to the business leaderships in different organizations, and this is industry agnostic as well, more often than not, everybody prefers the approach on the right. They don't necessarily care about TOGAF framework. They don't care about what TOGAF says about processes and procedures and policies, how you scale architecture function. They care about what do you do that actually make their life different? What do you do that actually make their operations more efficient? So when you talk about setting up a new function or revamping your architecture function, it's important that you understand which battle to kind of take on first. And this is something that one of my mentors passed down to me, and I feel it's really, really made a difference in my career in the architecture field, is that as an architecture professional, if you can't go into an organization and quickly identify where you can make an impact to the organization, you cannot do your job. That is an essential skill for all architecture professionals, and especially if you're coming in as an architecture leadership person to stand up a function brand new in an organization where they may have failed in the past. This is even more critical, because everybody's got the bad taste from past implementations before. Nobody sees the value. You're still order taker. You're still just someone that gets involved in after business made a decision. So that's the takeaway number one, is we really need to make sure that when we start standing up the function, we are starting to make an impact, incremental value to the business as we put out the capabilities from architecture. And show of hands if you feel your organization does not have an application sprawl problem. Right? Every organization I looked at have this exact same problem where the business goes out to say, hey, I have a problem to solve. I cannot wait for IT to get back to me on what to buy. So I'm going to go out and buy something that I feel is usable. And then once I buy that, I'm going to call up IT, hey, figure out how to make this thing work. Right? That's the easiest symptom where you can see IT isn't being seen as a partner. And when the business talks to the salespeople, no offense to the vendors, often than not, they got wowed by the capabilities. We got AI built into the solution, right? That's the new fancy thing. We got large language, we got LLM built into the solution. We have thousands of built-in reports that you can use out of box, right? Business leadership goes, wow, that's fantastic. We should buy that. We should pay top of the line dollars for that solution. But then when you go actually talk to them to say, hey, for that 1,000 report that's built in there, how many do you actually need? 10. Okay. How many do you foresee using in the future? Maybe 15. Fantastic. Now, do you still want to pay the extra dollar for the 1,000 built-in support report? Probably not, right? Oh, the solution has native connectors to 100 different applications. That's fantastic. Out of that 100 applications, how many do you actually use? 1. Okay, what about that other one you actually do need to connect to? Oh, they don't have it. We got to build in another integration layer to integrate with it. Okay, so why are we paying top-of-the-line dollars for that? Right? So these are the conversations that architecture professionals need to get in at the early stage of the business trying to solve a solution by themselves, where they do not hold the expertise of technology. This is where partnership is really, really important. And when you go into the decision conversation with the business leadership, often they say, hey, I think this solution covers the capabilities I want, and I like the bill, right? It's not a crazy licensing agreement. The support cost is within reason. We're good to spend the money. Well, that's fantastic. Do you actually know the total cost of ownership once you implement that solution? What do you mean? I know the licensing cost. I know the support contract. What others are there? What they don't factor in is the people, right? What often get left behind are the people and the skill set, and that largely impacts your actual time to market delivery. Let's say, for example, our entire team is AWS skill set, right? We've been running AWS for the longest time. Business goes, hey, we're going to go Azure tomorrow, all in. That's fantastic. It's not impossible for me to learn Azure with my AWS background, but that's going to take time. It's going to take time for our team to understand what new skills we need to understand, what new solutions we need to refactor into the new platform, and all that kind of stuff. And that impacts the time to delivery, and that impacts your total cost of ownership, because not everybody on the existing team is going to make it to the end of that ride. You will have people in your organization where they go, I'm AWS lifer. I'm never going to learn Azure. I'm going to go to another organization that's going to use AWS. That's what I want to do with my career. There's nothing wrong with it. But what you're also losing in that cost is that team member's organizational knowledge and everything they've done in the past years. That is not something you can easily replace, and that is very, very costly. So when we make architectural decisions, we got to make sure we understand the impact from a skill set development and human capital perspective. The last thing I want to touch on is from a governance standpoint. A lot of organizations are in the process of getting their tech stack into the cloud, right? Using cloud-native tools or lift and shift the data center into the cloud, which I don't recommend. That's fantastic. Do you have a way to govern the new platform? It's not going to be the same. You're not going to be running a team that looks after the server backend if you're using the SaaS services, right? So how do you make sure when you adopt the new technology, the new tool, you have the right governance in place so you don't end up being in a bad spot? An example I want to give is Power Apps. It's a very easy example, right? How many organizations are using Power Apps today? Right? See a few? How many of you can definitively say, I got a good handle on all the Power Apps running out there from my business team? Probably not, right? And that's scary. When you have something as powerful as Power Apps to enable the citizen development in a local, no-code environment, and you don't have enough visibility into what's actually happening out there, that's a very scary thing, because they could be using that for key decision makings. It could be making mistakes of that decision making and lose millions of dollars. That's tangible impact to the organization. The next thing I want to talk about is interim architecture. I don't know when this trend actually started, but it seems like a trend recently going pretty strong in that when people hear interim architecture, they get very scared. They associate interim architecture with a bandage that's put on the legacy solution. You're just going to do something for now, and we're going to run into the same old problem. There's a lot of new technical debt that's going to be introduced, and we're going to have to do a lot of rework when we try to do this thing again. It's fair. It's valid. Now, when I think about interim architecture, there's a couple of fundamental questions that I'll always ask myself, right? The first question is, by doing this particular way, are we just shifting the responsibilities or overhead to a different part of the process, right? So I'll give you an example. I had a conversation with one of our business teams. They say, hey, today we have the FTE that manually moves this file from network drive 1 to network drive 2. They don't do anything with the file. They just move the file from A to B. Fantastic. IT, help us automate that file movement. Sure. Seems straightforward. One of my technical members popped up and said, hey, we can write a script, move that file from A to B, and be done with it. Easy. But that's not necessarily the right approach, because if you do that, you're just shifting the responsibility of a manual human being moving the file to the overhead of managing a script now you have to do. And the total ROI for that script is next to zero. Right? It doesn't take that long for someone to move the file. So you got to look at, the first thing is are you shifting that responsibility to something else? And the second thing I always look at is, are you moving towards the target architecture? By doing something in the interim today, are you introducing new technical debt, or are you making a step forward to your target architecture, which may take longer time to complete? That is very, very important, because you don't want to introduce something that's going to be a new technical debt that now you got to pay 2 years down the road, right? The third fundamental question I always ask myself, how much rework am I looking at by doing this interim step? Am I looking at 100 hours of redevelopment of something? Or am I looking at, we just need to switch a parameter down the road, target a new source, off it goes, right? Because from a cost perspective, all of that factors into it, right? To the organization, if it's all FTEs, they may not see that as immediate as they might. But if you have a large labor force with contractors, every hour is billed, right? And all of that costs add up. So it's up to the architecture leadership and really the IT organization as a whole to make sure that they never lose sight of the target architecture. When someone comes along to say, hey, I understand there is an overall holistic approach to modernize a certain technology, but I need this thing done right away because of XYZ. The IT organization and the architecture team need to make sure whatever they put in place in the interim today are actually moving towards the target and they never lose sight. Another example is, in the early days of getting data center into the cloud, I was involved in some large migration projects, right? And this is for billion-dollar organizations with large IT team. Decision makers go, hey, we're going to forklift all of our VMs up into Azure, right? Because the immediate fire is that if we don't do that, we're going to have to pay millions of dollars to renew hardware in our data center. Understood? Let's do that. But then what's left behind was the promise of we're going to modernize all of these services using cloud-native tools immediately after the migration. Guess what? Once the fire is put out, nobody revisited that topic. And for the longest time, it's still running out VMs. It made virtually no difference from an operational efficiency standpoint. Right? I learned that lesson the hard way. The second time I had to do that, I went and talked to my leadership. I go, hey, I want you to put in writing that you're going to guarantee me, once we figure out this immediate fire, we're going to have the resources allocated and the time to actually modernize the tech stack with cloud-native tools. Guess what happened? I made a little bit more progress, right? It wasn't completely left untouched, and we maintained some of that site at the end, but it wasn't perfect, and it's never going to be perfect. But it's important that there's someone in the organization that recognizes what that target state needs to be and stay on it, right? Because the business folks, they don't really care that much, right? If you were to talk to the CFO to say, hey, we're going to have your backend financial services running on some virtual servers in the cloud, and then we're going to migrate that to some SaaS solution, right? That's native cloud services, serverless, and auto-scale, and all that. The CFO doesn't care. The CFO cares about the bill that they have to pay for the cloud services, and they care about the uptime for the financial services system, right? So IT organization, the leadership, and architecture have to stay on the target. And this is kind of the end of the slide, and it's really from a perception standpoint, IT need to get out of the afterthoughts, order taker, cost center type of mode and get more into the partnership. How do you build that trust and partnership with your business teams to go say, hey, we're going to a different direction. It's going to be business-led because business knows what they need the best. But it's also going to need to be technology-enabled. The two parties need to tie hand in hand to actually deliver transformation effects to the organization. If you constantly have IT being the afterthought and order taker, the business is never going to be satisfied. They're always going to see you as a cost center. They pay a lot of money for a lot of people with fancy titles, and then they don't see the tangible impact. But if you have IT or architecture as the partner in every business decision-making where they need technology support, you can get proactive. You can get ahead of the business demand. You can forecast, hey, business is probably going to go in that other direction because the market is going to that direction. Therefore, my technology team can get ahead of the skill set development. We can get ahead of testing some of the new services that comes out in the cloud that can benefit the business when they make that decision. So then your IT team isn't always behind trying to figure out how to do things. They already know how to do things. By the time the business team asks, hey, can we do X, Y, Z? Oh, yeah. We've already tested it. We know how to do it. We know how to handle it. We already got ahead of it, right? So then your overall time to delivery for the business is a lot faster, and now you've generated impact to the business operations as a whole. That's the end. That's the end. I think I got some Q&A time.
Yep, get some time for questions. You've got time for a couple questions.
Right?
You've got time for a couple questions.
Sure.
Yep. Any questions from the audience? Oh, come on, after that, there's nothing. Oh, there he is. Yep.
Thank you very much. A great presentation. The last cliffhanger moment of business value in that statement you had up on screen, are you able, within your own organization, to have a kind of common view on what business value looks like? What the components of it are?
If I understand your question, it's around what the actual, like what the definition is for business value?
Yeah, and how it's measured.
Right. So it's an excellent question. When I talk to organizations, quite often the answer I get is dollar amount, right? Through technology, through architecture, we saved X amount of dollars, right? We consolidated technology stack, we made it simplified, we saved X amount of technology licensing. That's fantastic. That's one metric. However, not everything is going to be associated with a direct dollar value, right? Lowering the operational risk is a key part of it. One of the things we're currently doing at the bank is that we're putting in new processing solution in place where we can handle much larger transaction volume from our fintech partners, right? It makes the processing of these transactions more reliable. It makes their customers more happy because now money movement is more reliable, right? They're happy using the services from our fintech partners. These are reducing the risk from our banking's operational standpoint. That's value, right? So it's not always going to be, here's the X amount of dollars saved. If you're reducing the risk to the operations, if you're improving efficiencies, headcount, right? I'm freeing up 50% of an FTE because that person doesn't need to do the stuff manually anymore. We put in the automation for it. That's efficiency to the organization. That's 50% that he didn't have to pay extra and can allocate elsewhere. I don't know if I answered your question.
One last question, anybody? No? Going once? Twice?
Good?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Well done.